YouTube Ozick going. The Goat House is back. Earlier today, the Carolina Panthers fired head coach Matt Rule. They also fired a couple other coaches on the staff. And it's sure starting to sound like the Carolina Panthers could be sellers, traders, before or at the NFL trade deadline. So we're here to break down a lot of players who could be traded, won't be traded, what their value is, where they can land, things like that. But there's multiple reasons that says they could be sellers other than just they fired their coach. But main reasons, they're short on draft picks. Another one is their owner, David Tepper, was kind of sound like he wanted culture change, wanted the right people in there, the right players in there, more winning attitude. So there was a quote from him today that was basically along those lines. So they may be willing to move on from some players to get different, more draft picks and bring in different players, better players. And they got some good young players, so to kind of add on top of that as well. We have full NFL coverage here. We have weekly picks, score predictions, power rankings, a lot more, always adding more videos like this. We'll be talking live during every NFL game. There's a Monday night game tonight, Chiefs-Raiders, so join us for that. We have a picks league going on. We're sponsored by the GLD shop. I'm rocking their Chiefs chains. The Chiefs play tonight. We have a code GOAT, 33% off. Any link you're looking for pinned in the comments. Make sure you follow that Twitter. Live updates, talking a lot about what I'm going to talk about in this video. Twitter, you get it first, just in text format there. Super followers get bonus content. Link down below for that. So first, let's talk about guys that I just 100% lock. I guess maybe it's a little bold of me to say I'm guaranteeing they won't be traded, because it's anything in this game, whether it's on the field or with roster management, it's pretty freaking hard to 100% guarantee things. But so that's why I think it's a little bold in a way. But I really don't think these guys will be dealt. J.C. Horn, looking like one of the top corners maybe already in football based on this year. A lot of upside there. Was a top-tier prospect for a reason. Jeremy Chin is so important in that defense. What he's able to do, the versatility, and he's a great young player that's only getting better. And then both their tackles, two tackles here. Ken McWanu, obviously, who also can play guard, but Taylor Moton, their right tackle, they have had struggles getting the offensive line together. They don't want to go backwards. They're finally getting things together. It looks like they got a pretty good group here, led by these two guys. It wouldn't make any sense to deal those either one, especially Ekwonu. They just drafted in the first round. So these guys really aren't included. In a way, they're included because I'm talking about them right now, but not really included in this video because I really don't think they'll be dealt. There's other guys that I also don't think will be dealt, but I think it's a possibility. So let's talk about those guys first. How about Brian Burns, the edge defender, still very young, still getting better, and he's very productive. I think his value is a first-round pick. It's going to take a first-round pick to get him. He won't be traded for less than a first. I'd be absolutely shocked. I'd be shocked as you see the trade chances. I think it's very unlikely. People saying they haven't extended him yet, so they're trading him. Well, no. He's on his option year the next year. They already picked that up, obviously, not this year, next year. Then they could extend him. There's no hurry. There doesn't need to be a hurry. I'm not going to 100% rule it out, but it's pretty damn close to that. I really don't see them trading him. It's a big piece of that defense. But you see some landing spots that I could see, teams that could afford him next year. That's something to think about during this video too. If you don't see your team as a landing spot, it could mean they can't afford him now or in the future. Maybe their team's in a rebuild process. They don't want to trade any picks away. Things like that. I can't just blurt out every team. It has to make sense. But there's a lot of teams for Brian Burns, teams you see listed there that could be interested, looking for a pass rusher. I think he fits either scheme. A lot of people had him as a 3-4 outside linebacker coming in out of Florida State, but he's fit well as a 4-3 end for the Panthers. So, he's athletic enough to play at 3-4 still, so I could see him playing either, But so there's some teams. I know the Eagles have been thrown out there. I've noticed every time there's a guy may be available or a guy is rumored, the Eagles seem to pop up a lot. I think a big fan base. I think it's the Eagles, Bears. Every time I see somebody available, everyone, those fans are going crazy. Like, we're getting this guy, or how about this team? Are we getting this guy? So, but the Eagles have been mentioned for Brian Burns. Not that they have shown interest, but they have a lot of pass rushers. They're always looking for more. Other teams that could use one, other teams that have cap space next year. So those are the reasons those teams are up there. I'm not going to go too in depth because I really, based on where I think he's going to go, because I don't think he's really going to go anywhere. I think there's some sort of small percentage that he could be dealt. I was very close to putting him on the 100% lock back with the Panthers list, but I can't really say that. I can't. I can say like 99%, but it's a pretty damn good player that could be available. Another one that's probably being talked about the most, or second most, Christian McCaffrey probably the most. DJ Moore, the wide receiver of the Panthers, and there's multiple reasons why I don't think it's likely at all. I think it's very unlikely he'll be dealt, and why there's a limited amount of landing spots that I have. It starts with the value. I think his value is probably a first-round pick. To the Panthers, it's definitely a first-round pick. Other teams, will they trade a first-round pick for DJ Moore? That's a big question. I don't think many teams would. Maybe no teams would. I think they would be comfortable with the second, maybe second and a third, second, third, and something else. I don't think they would trade a first. It's possible that maybe they would, but look at a team like the Chiefs that's contending. A team like the Patriots that has a lot of money next year, excuse me. But would they trade a first this year? That's why it's questionable. Houston has 2 first-round picks. They're desperately looking for a receiver. It's really tricky. There's other teams. I see the Bears being mentioned about DJ Moore. Big fan base there. They're always they want better players, and the Bears are limited at receiver, and that kind of showed maybe at the end of the game in the Vikings game last night with the interesting decision by a receiver. But again, I think the Panthers are going to demand a first-round pick. The Bears most certainly are not going to trade their first-round pick. If the Panthers will be willing to accept something less, then maybe they'll be in there. I do think they want to hang on to draft picks, so that's why the Bears really aren't going to pop up in this video, even though they are mentioned a lot, on Twitter and social media when guys are available. They're in rebuild process. Then in the rebuild process, they want to keep their draft picks. So that's the main problem here. How many teams could afford him? How many teams want him? How many teams would be willing to give him a first-round pick? The Panthers, I really don't think will be willing to just trade him away for less than a first-round pick. So it's kind of on the fringe of where his value is, and I think the Panthers, again, would demand a first-round pick. So I think he's pretty unlikely for that reason, even though he's being talked about a lot here. But a team like the Chiefs would be something. It's a team that's all out every single season. They would get a lot better with DJ Moore. They would be willing to maybe trade that. Maybe that's a team that would be willing to trade that late first-round pick, but it's a little tricky. It's more complex than that. The Chiefs they'll be able to pay him next year, but they have a lot of money tied up. They're going to be careful where they're spending. So I'd say if I had to say one, though, the Chiefs probably the most intriguing one there, and not very unlikely, but I'm not really counting on it. I'd say it's pretty much unlikely as Derek Brown, and maybe the agreement on the value for him as well, because as he played like the top first-round pick that he was, no. And as he played like a second-round value, no, really not. Even though he's shown some flashes, but he's still, he's 24 years old, a lot of upside, a lot of teams looking for interior defensive linemen. So he's definitely worth that second-round pick, it feels like, based on what he can become. But would the Panthers even accept that because they still believe in him as a top first-round pick? Would a team give that up because he hasn't played? He's been a little underwhelming so far, even though you've seen the flashes. So it's really hard to meet where the value would be between the Panthers and other teams. So that is the main reason. I'm not really counting on it there. But landing spots, teams that could use an interior guy. I started listing teams that made the most sense. Teams like the Ravens, the Cardinals, the Browns, the Cowboys, the Chargers. And I'm like, man, everybody. But it's what it says behind me. Literally everyone. Maybe not all 32 teams. Well, 31 because the Panthers would be 32. But because some teams have a guy playing this position that is very good. But there's not too many of them out there. But he's cheap. He's young. He's got upside. So literally everyone would be interested. I think the Panthers want him to be a part of whatever's to come in the future. So, and the more I'm talking about, the more I'm saying he probably should be under very unlikely with the other guys. So that's kind of what the video is about here, kind of figuring out each step, who could be value landing spots, but why would they be available? Why wouldn't they? Can they reach an agreement on the value? It just sounds like he could be part of the Panthers long term here. So I'm not really counting on that one at all, but I can't say 100% guarantee he's going to be back like the first 4 guys we talked about. Next, let's talk about Christian McCaffrey, running back of the Panthers. There was already rumors by a couple different Bills writers that the Bills did show interest, but Tom Pelissero tweeted that is not true very recently. If we're going to record this, that is not true. But he says calls will be made. So pretty interesting, but I think it's possible. It's another one where I can't really sit here and say it's going to happen, but I think it's possible, unlike a couple of the other ones that we talked about. And again, value could be tricky because the Panthers, would they part with them for a second-round pick? Maybe they won't. Maybe they would take a first, and they wouldn't do it. I don't think any other team would do it for a first-round pick because he has a pretty pricey contract. The next upcoming years, nothing crazy, but the next couple of years moving forward. So it's not like you could be out of it after a year or two. But a second-round pick, would the Panthers accept it? Might be teams that don't do it even with a second-round pick because there's a lot of teams that don't value the running back. There's a lot of teams that don't want to pay him or can't pay him in the future. I only had 3 teams that I thought of. The Bills, they kind of been in the mix. They're trying to win, rumored to be in the mix. They're trying to win a Super Bowl. They can get better at the running back position, even though they have a few options. Really fits their system, with the pass first type of offense, which McCaffrey could really be part of. But do the Bills want to pay him long term? The Rams, they're not afraid to go get better at any position, but looking at the running back position, they traded for Sony Michel last year, and the running backs have been pretty underwhelming. They really need to get the running game going to get some stress off of Stafford and the pass, just the passing and the pass protection, everything. Mix it up. It's going to make the passing game easier, so go and get a back could be ideal. And the Eagles like to use a collection of backs. They're playing pretty well right now, led by Miles Sanders, but they could get better with Christian McCaffrey, obviously, and that's a team that's really not afraid to make moves like that. But, so not too many teams because, how many teams would want to trade for a running back? How many teams want to value the running back? How many teams can afford this running back? So kind of got to go down that checklist with all these guys, but that would be the specific one for Christian McCaffrey. But, yeah, we'll see. I think that the problem could be teams lowballing the Panthers, offering maybe not even a third. Maybe they're offering a fourth, and the Panthers are probably like, hell no, But the other, you got to put yourself in the shoes of the GMs, the other teams, like, hey, do we absolutely need this guy? Like, are we going to die without him? And then we got to pay him how much money in the future? Are we really going to trade a second-round pick or more? That's the tough part. So those are reasons why maybe we shouldn't be full-out accounting on this to happen. I do think it's possible, though, because, again, the Panthers they want to change some things. They probably want to keep the super young guys. They want to add draft picks, that's for sure. So I think it's possible. Another guy, Robbie Anderson, which is a guy that definitely could be dealt. I think possible, probably more possible than McCaffrey, perhaps. I think a 4th or a 5th. I was kind of back and forth with that. There are teams that could use a receiver. 4th or 5th, somewhere around there. Landing spots, Green Bay, the Chargers, Tennessee, Indianapolis, New England, some teams there. But the problem is, Robbie Anderson actually is a little pricey next year. He's going to be, somewhat pricey around that 11, 12 million range. It's going to be a hit on the team, and that's pretty good for a decent receiver. We haven't seen him stay consistent. You could say it's the quarterback play of the Panthers, perhaps. It's accurate, but you wish it was a little more comfortable for teams. And some of these teams are a little bit tight with the cap space next year. So that's the problem with Anderson, though, too, because you got to be on the lookout for next year. But there are some teams that we listed that could use a receiver. I think he would fit them pretty well. Some of those teams really need a receiver because they're injured right now, or some teams just aren't strong there at the moment. But that's the tricky part with Anderson, though, because can they afford him? Do they want him this year? Do they want him next year? Can they afford him next year? Again, there's other teams that need a receiver. I think, some teams that are kind of in the rebuild or just past the rebuild stage, I don't think it'd be worth it for him with Anderson. Just keep your draft picks. You're not trying to win now. You're not desperate to get Anderson now. So that's why those teams aren't on here. But again, keep in mind, you can't just snap your finger and get this guy and afford him this year and next year. He has what people don't talk about. It's going to be around 11, 12 million cap hit for next year. So do you want that on Robbie Anderson? Not every team will. So I think it's possible, though. This is mainly because it's definitely one that the Panthers would be willing to move on from. Maybe they would even accept that 5th, like I said, value 4th or 5th. Next, Shaq Thompson, which I think is possible because they're if they are sellers, because that means if they're sellers, they may be somewhere in that rebuild process, maybe not going all the way down to square one because they have some really good young players. But Thompson's young. I consider 28 young, but he's still he's not really young, and not where it's like we need to keep this guy for our rebuild or whatever we're doing. But at the same time, he's pretty valuable to that defense, that inside linebacker position. Pretty good at pretty much everything you ask out of a linebacker. I think he's quite the underrated player. I think his value probably would be a third plus. Really, I think it should be he has some injury concern though, but maybe a third and a fourth. I think if a trade happened, I'd probably predict it to be a third and a fifth maybe. But some teams that could use that linebacker, you think more likely he fits the 4-3 teams like Washington, like Detroit, like Houston, which I'm blocking right now, like Dallas, which is an upgrade at their inside linebacker position, which you would fit Dallas so well too, because he has kind of a uniqueness about him with his blitzing where he's able to line up. So combine that with Parsons, which they're different type of players, but combine those unique players would be something special. So he fits those defense a little bit more, but the Patriots are a little bit of a multiple defense. They show different looks, obviously. They could use an inside linebacker. They want more of the athletic type than they had in the past. That's why they went with younger guys, but Thompson definitely can fit that with the athletic type. And then you got a team like the Giants who's 3-4, but his blitzing ability really fits Martindale's scheme on the inside linebacker position. So that's what I thought. I thought the Giants kind of made some sense too, but the Commanders make a ton of sense. I think the Patriots, even though they're not really a 4-3, I think the Patriots make a lot of sense. The Cowboys make a lot of sense. Like I said, that fit. We wouldn't really count on them doing it. I'm really looking at the Commanders and the Patriots. I mean, I would love the Cowboys though. Like my favorite one out of all this is probably the Cowboys. But if I was a betting man here, I'd say one of those first two teams maybe a little more likely. But the Commanders probably get pulled from that conversation if they keep losing, though, leading up to the deadline. If they keep looking like one of the worst teams in football, they're going to be sellers. They're not going to be buyers. So we'll see there. I think it's possible. The reason I almost didn't put possible, why maybe I said unlikely or very unlikely, is because, he's a key piece of that defense, and they still believe in their defense. And, of course, Steve Wilkes, he still wants to win some games out there. He's a captain for a reason, so it's a tough one. It's a tough one, but I don't think he's one of those super young key pieces they just will not trade. I really don't think that it's one of those guys. But can they match up on value and compensation with another team? That's kind of the question for all of these. Talk about Dante Jackson, who they brought back in free agency this offseason, is a solid corner. Experience playing zone and man. They also have J.C. Horn, who's obviously a lock to keep and as an outside corner for them. They also have C.J. Anderson, too, which I think if they want to be sellers and they want to, roll with the key young pieces, I think it would make more sense to roll with Horn and Henderson as their corners, even though they use all three. So maybe they want to keep all three, and Jackson is still young, but there's a lot of teams looking for corners here. I have Miami listed behind me, if you're wondering. Third round pick plus maybe a third and a fourth. Those teams I really like the fit with the 49ers. They're really beat up at the position. He does have 2 more years on his deal. It's pretty affordable though, in my opinion. The Ravens, Marcus Peters, a free agent after this season. They're always looking for more corners. They seem to be beat up at the position a lot as it is. Kyle Fuller's out for the year, obviously. Raiders, Cardinals, Steelers, Rams, and I have Miami here. Those teams definitely could be looking for Miami more so because of injuries. Those teams definitely could be looking for a corner like this. Teams that like to mix up zone and man. I think it's possible. I think it's pretty possible there. It's weird because they just signed him. The Panthers just signed him, and it was like a multi-year deal, so it's like they like him a lot. That'd be a reason why maybe you say they won't trade him, but they get something good here, maybe even a second. Like I said, third and fourth makes sense. That's pretty equal to a second, so second's possibility. Teams valuing corners high. Teams desperately need corners because there's shortage and because the injuries, of course, as well. So there's quite a few teams that could be interested in a guy like Dante Jackson. Or maybe they don't have Dante Jackson available. Maybe they have C.J. Henderson available. I think his value, it won't make much sense, though, because his value would be a lot less. I think the Panthers would be like, we'd probably rather keep him and develop him because we like these young. We want to keep rolling with these young guys, and his value we think could be a lot more on where he's going to be. So that's why Jackson trading with him would make a little bit more sense. And one that I think is very possible, and this video is mainly talking about kind of the high-profile names. Of course, there's a lot more guys in the roster that could be dealt, could definitely be kept, guys like that. Another lineman I would watch out for is Cam Irving, who has had some time starting throughout his career, but have been a very solid backup piece, an insurance piece. And there's teams that have injuries every single game at the offensive line. There's a shortage on offensive linemen, veteran experienced offensive linemen. So Irving's a guy that definitely, I would almost count on him being traded for a late round pick. Backup, currently not a big name. Bo's been kind of a big name. He kind of was as a free agent. He was pretty good for the Ravens last year. There was teams there's a lot of teams that were interested in him. They just kind of worried about the injury concern. I know there was fan bases that their team needed a center, and they wanted Bozeman. I remember that from going into free agency, doing our free agency videos. The Panthers got him, and he started the year injured. He's active on the active roster right now. They just haven't made the change yet. Will they make the change? Are they comfortable with him being healthy? Do they just not want to make change to the offensive line? Do they want to keep Elflein in there? That's pretty surprising, but it looks like the case right now. But again, he was injured, was dealing with multiple injuries in the past, so that just could be the reason. But I think a fifth-round pick, maybe you can say his talent-wise, he maybe has more value. But, yeah, he's not playing right now. He has the injury concern because of that. It actually could be less as a fifth-round pick. I could see it either way. I wouldn't see more than a fifth-round pick, actually. But and then teams that could use a center right now, the 49ers, people question the center position going in. Offensive line's maybe playing a little better than expected. The Browns had an injury there going into the year. Cardinals have Rodney Hudson, but he missed games last year. He missed this past game this year. They're looking; it's a disaster whenever he's out, so they could be looking for that center. Commanders have an injury there. Obviously, it just depends on if they're kind of throwing in the towel at some point, at the trade deadline. And the Raiders, I think they're fine with Andre James, but played 2 games this year. So just some teams that could be looking. I could see a team even doing it if they could, for some reason get him for, and I think it's very possible, I shouldn't say for some reason, but a 6th-round pick or maybe a 7th-round pick. We see guys going for less than expected all the time, maybe a pick swap. I can see if it's for less than a 5th, 6, 7, which is realistic, like I said, I could see a team doing it just to stash him. Like, hey, we're trying to make a run in the playoffs. We got a little bit of a question here, or we have a guy that may get injured here and there. Let's get this guy, and we'll feel very safe because he's got a pretty cheap deal, and we can go get him. So I think it's very possible, unless the Panthers throw him in there and they like what they see from him, and they maybe keep Elflein on the bench, or they trade him. But they don't want to run out of offensive linemen either, though. So maybe they don't want to trade too many because depth is very, very important when it comes to the offensive line positions there. Thought about the Colts, too, because Ryan Kelly got hurt last week. I just don't think it's anything super major, but there's other teams that could use a center. Like I said, could grab him to stash him just in case because they have injury concern or some questions there. But, just kind of wanted to go over the big names in this video. Of course, there's a lot more guys in the Panthers that really aren't the big names that could be dealt, or maybe some people think they could, maybe they won't. But, just wanted to kind of get the points across on why guys can and can't get dealt, or why it's not just trade for him. There's a lot more that goes into it on both sides, the Panthers and the other teams, when it comes to cap space, trade value, future. You want to pay him in the future? Are you stuck with him in the future? There are multiple different factors. Are teams rebuilding? Do they want to trade draft picks? So many factors that goes into it. And a lot of people, when you talk about it on Twitter, social media, they don't really realize that. They kind of just blurt out teams like, oh, okay, this makes the most sense. Like, without really breaking it down, why it actually makes sense. So I thought it was a good idea to kind of break these all down here. So let me know your guys' thoughts. A whole video for Panthers players possibly being dealt. Interesting. Didn't think I would do this, but they could be sellers. I thought the most interesting thing was David Tepper, their owner's comments about the culture. Like, he feels like you can look up the quote. He almost made it like we haven't had the right players that have the right mindset. We like, not talking about all of them, but just wants the right mindset from the players, gets the right characters in there. So I thought that was very interesting based on his comments and why. And then their shortage on draft picks and why they could be sellers for sure. Why it makes sense, but I do think what they do leading up to the trade deadline, because most teams will wait for the trade deadline, even though they show interest now, because they'll be cheaper because they have a salary, and then you knock weeks off, the weeks played off of the salary, it ends up being cheaper. So that's why teams talk about it and then wait to the trade deadline, and that's when the trades happen. That is exactly why they wait. So a lot of these, it could be a waiting game here. It could be the trade deadline, and let's say the Panthers just start winning, then they're probably not going to deal pieces. So there's a lot of factors in here. It's not just they're going to trade this guy, this team's going to trade for that guy. So looking forward to talking about it in the comments. We're always talking with you guys on Twitter there, so check us out there at GoDousNFL. There's a link pinned in the comments. There's also other important links that could be useful to you in the comments as well. Like, subscribe, turn notifications on. Full NFL coverage here. We got everything NFL. That's going to do it for this one, though. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.